seen. He would call me and say, "Hey, Baggett, what do you got that you really like?" And I'd say, "Oh, I got this. Actually, the 0018 that we talked about. I said, I've got this guitar that really changed my life." He goes, "Well, send it to me." And I said, "What?" He said, "Send it to me. I want to see it." And so that started a pattern over our friendship of many, many years of him constantly looking at what, not necessarily what I considered, although he had a respect for what my passions, but he also asked that same question of anybody. He asked the same question of mandolin builders and mandolin players. And somebody said they had a Lloyd Loar mandolin. He said, "I want to see it." And he would look at those instruments and study them and think about them. And I always said he would eat the meat and spit out the bones. He didn't say, "I'll make you a copy of a 1937 D18. I don't think that was an interest to him. His interest was seeing what it was and seeing what he liked. And he was smart enough to know what he liked about it, what he didn't like about it, and how he could incorporate that into his guitars. He always said he made his guitars even though they look like Martins and Gibsons. He was very comfortable. In fact, most of the makers that I'm talking about tonight, Bourgeois, Husson Dalton, Santa Cruz, all these guys that make, and Collings, of course, very comfortable in their own skin making guitars that look like traditional guitars. As players, I think most of us are really comfortable picking up a dreadnought, picking up an OM, picking up a triple O, picking up a double O. If you're used to that shape. And so if by putting that guitar in your lap, playing it, you become, it makes it easier for you to be comfortable with the sound of the instrument. So that, to me, it's easier for me to think about than thinking about how tight the waist is and how big the bottom bout is and how deep it is. Honestly, I'm glad somebody cares, but it's usually it's not necessarily me. You know, I spend enough time and find myself impassioned with traditional stuff, you know, and that's what I liked in 1970, and I still like it. No, I mentioned to somebody today, I said, when I quit liking it, I'll just quit doing it. You know, I'll take my one guitar and go home. But I still like them, you know. I get excited when I get another old guitar that I can work on and restore and put in the hands of a player and hear the difference between that and other guitars that I have. And the path that most of the traditional makers use is looking back. I said that. So like I've got three, I'm kind of a D18 guy, so it's easiest for me to bring D18s around. So these are all D18s, and they all kind of look the same. I'll just hold them up one at a time. This is a 41. Played a lot. Loved a lot. Never abused, but you know, it's been around. So 41. I'll explain the differences after I hold them all up. This is a 39. Again, been around. I'm not real comfortable when I find a guitar that's in mint condition. I kind of go, somebody didn't like this guitar. Why is it still, you know, you feel more comfortable. And occasionally that isn't the case. My friend Chris has a little Martin that's in lovely condition and absolutely great guitar. But I think one of the reasons that guitar is in great condition is it started life as a Hawaiian guitar to play slide, which is never taken very much. So when you convert that guitar to a steel string guitar, it can become a wonderful guitar, which that guitar did, in spite of the fact that it's in beautiful condition. Most of these guitars, I have guitars in fabulous condition, but that's all they are. They don't necessarily sound any better. So we have a 41, a 39, and 38. So if you're a builder if you're Richard Hoover from Santa Cruz, if you're Bill Collings from Collings Guitars, if you're the guys from Husson Dalton, if you're Dana Bourgeois, you say, oh, I've seen these guitars, I love these guitars, and I want to build guitars. Players love these guitars. Let's try to make new guitars that we can put in the hands of players that will also, that will go, oh, I like this guitar. If there's nothing wrong with making a new guitar that sounds as good, even has the potential to sound as good as these guitars do. The interesting thing to me about these three guitars is the 38 is considered the most desirable guitar, the 41 the least desirable guitar. They all three sound very good. And so it's almost like a de-evolution of it. They went a different direction, but it turns out that the guitars from the mid-30s, I kind of say 1929 to 1939, and within that range, there's development of some of the very best guitars that have ever been made. The difference in these, they changed the bracing. After 1938, people talk about bridge plates and advanced X bracing, neck widths. These guitars really demonstrate all that stuff. I got a top back here. So that's the X braces. If you know guitars, that's the X brace. All the guitars that we're talking about here have scallop bracing. That's where this brace is scooped out. Guitars were built this way clear up until 1945 by Martin. They also moved the position of this X brace by 1/2 inch in late 38. And so if you talk to Martin people, they talk about advanced X, forward shifted and rear shifted X brace. That's forward shifted, rear shifted X brace. The forward shifted is the X brace comes closer to the sound hole. Those are the guitars that from bluegrass players, high-end solo players, guys like Brian Sutton, David Greer, all the Kenny Smith. Those are the kind of guitars that Chris Eldridge, that generally they would go, prefer or go after. Doesn't mean that if they pick up a rear shifted guitar that just knocks them out, they would walk away from it. They're still fabulous guitars, but there's a difference. So the necks that were put on guitars up until until early 39 or mid 39 were a wider neck. Oh, by the way, that's a bridge plate. People talk about bridge plates all the time. A lot of people have never seen one. They've heard the name, but they're not quite sure what it is. That's the plate. That goes underneath where the bridge, if this guitar had a top on it instead of two insides, the bridge would go on top of that. So you have the bridge plate. It adds stiffness and rigidity underneath where the bridge mounts. So the necks that are preferable to an awful lot of those players and were the wider necks. This is a 1 3/4 neck, has about a 2 5/16, 2 3/8 bridge pin spacing at this end. I'm not quite sure why that changed. There's a whole lot of changes that happened with Martin that nobody has a clear answer to. Some of it was by the early 40s, there were some electric guitar players. People were starting to play faster. There were probably people asking for slimmer necks. I want to, that neck's too big for me. Okay, I mean, they're in the business to sell guitars. Okay, we can make a narrower neck. And then I think, there's a possibility that the position of the X brace changed because they felt like if they moved the X brace down this way, they would reduce the amount of belling that might happen in a guitar. In the end, it doesn't really matter. In the end, those ended up being less favorable guitars, and historically, than the wide neck guitars, advanced X guitars. And so we have the 1 3/4 neck, advanced X, the 39 has rear shifted X bracing. It's moved back. Otherwise, it's pretty identical. And then when you get to the 41, it's got the narrow, it's so visible you can see the difference in the necks just by looking at them across the room. The necks got way narrow in the 40s. A lot of players like them. Julian Lage, fabulous modern player, plays a 1 11/16 neck. So they're extremely valid, you know, as instruments. But if you're a builder, I mean, if you're a builder that has seen all this kind of stuff and has the market and the resources and everything, well, let's make them all. But most builders don't. And so if they're going to build a traditional guitar, traditional dreadnought, a traditional OM, a traditional double O, any of those, you're going to try to find what was the most popular size, shape, and you're going to build, that's what you're going to do. Martin even did. Martin came back in the 70s and started trying to look back at history, what people thought were their better guitars, and they started making reissue guitars and vintage D2hs, D28Vs, you know, going back. And they didn't necessarily see it right away. Those guitars, some of them were good and some of them weren't. And they've come a long way since then, but that whole wave of going kind of down from the 30s and then waving along through the 40s and 50s, and then in the 70s, kind of lost track. I looked at a Wikipedia definition of vintage guitars, and they said Martin guitars pre 1970. I thought that was kind of interesting, but in a way, it's kind of true, because in 1970 they were making thousands of guitars because the folk era was going on. You had Dylan, Joni Mitchell, Crosby, Stills and Nash. Pardon? Baby boomers who wanted to get out and play, which is a great thing in a way, but as a manufacturer, you kind of go, oh my gosh, how do we make all these guitars? And sometimes you just didn't make them quite right. They did a pretty good job. Even if you look at a 70s Martin, they still did a pretty good job. They do a way better job now, because not only have they paid attention to what they made in the past, but they paid attention to what the people, these small makers that I was telling you about, have done. The last time I was in the engineer's office at Martin, they had a Collings D2h leaning against the wall. They said, this is what our competition is making. They're making guitars that look like ours, and people like them better than ours. We need to do something. And they did it. I mean, they're smart people. They're nice people. But, yes, Alan?
I have a question. So you talk about the modern manufacturers who study
Mm-hmm.
such as your guitar, and they get all the specs and everything. They can't really reproduce that exactly, can they? It's patent.
Well, no, I don't think there's any limitation as far as, Alan just asked if they can if there's any restriction on reproducing as far as patents. I don't really think there is. I know that Gibson has tried to sue people that make F5 mandolins. I don't think with much success. I don't think that's it. But another aspect of the question is, can they see all of the aspects of the guitar to get the best out of that, to make the guitar that is close to that? And whereas some builders might say, well, they're like this, none of these guitars have an adjustable truss rod. And there are some small builders who say, well, they didn't put an adjustable truss rod in a pre-war Martin, so I'm not going to put one in my guitar. But Bill Collings said, adjustable truss rod can be kind of nice because people are much more sensitive to action and playability than they were back then. And I'd have to guess that if there was a good adjustable truss rod available in the 30s, that they may have used it. You know, Gibson put adjustable truss rods in since early, from the 20s. they weren't necessarily good because the way they were put in, they didn't function as well as they could sometimes. But, you know, Collings said, oh, I want to build a guitar that looks and feels and weighs like this, but I don't have a problem with the adjustable truss rod. I actually sent, I've heard people say, well, adjustable truss rod makes the neck heavy. So I told Bill Collings that one time. He goes, well, send me a 30s neck. So I said, okay. I took a neck off of a 36 that I was working on, and I sent it to him. And he called me up and says, my neck weighs exactly the same. It balances in the same point, and it's adjustable. I said, you win. Yeah, you're right. You know, I have no problem with it. You know, I think the problem with an adjustable truss rod in a guitar is if you don't make the right kind of neck, and then hoping your truss rod is going to fix your lack of detail and your lack of attention to detail. I'm not, you can ask the guys in the repair shop, but I can pretty much tell you from my experience in the repair shop, I rarely ever adjust a truss rod in a Collings guitar. I rarely adjust a truss rod in a bourgeois guitar or Husson Dalton, because they know how to make they know how to make the neck, and the truss rod is there for just fine tuning, and it's a good thing. And if you look at how they do it, it's be a lot easier for them to slap a steel rod in it, just like these guitars. So, long-winded answer to your question, but there's no restriction from the past of trying to copy. And I don't think of it as copies. I think it as in terms of observing and examining what's there and then making your guitar. Anyway, any questions from anybody else there? Yes.
These three guitars you have here, are they whole? I mean, they the original neck, original body, etc. I know you get in sometimes you just get the body, and then when you search for a neck, you get original necks, or how do you've got so many
Well,
things going on.
the question was, are these guitars, do they have all the original parts? And do I get guitars that are missing necks and things like that, or missing parts that I have? I've learned over the years that finding a guitar that's restorable, that has the most of its parts there is the best way to go, because finding a neck for a guitar, changing parts out, putting new tops on, all that, that's a whole nother thing. And it's really, and considering that modern makers are making guitars, if it costs you $5,000 to put a new top and maybe $6,000 to put a new top and a new neck on a guitar, what do you have? You have an old guitar with a new top and a new neck. You go out and buy a new guitar that was built from ground up to be the best. So no, these guitars, what have been done to these guitars? I didn't do anything to this guitar. This is the way it came to us. It's got a replaced bridge, got a repaired crack. I would say that the neck, I'd have to get my magnifiers to say for sure, I would say that the neck has been taken off and put back on. That's very common for Martins. Martin guitars have a dovetail neck that's glued on, and in the early days, Mike Longworth, who was the Martin historian, said the Martin neck as a permanent installation is not made, well, cannot be removed. We went, why not? And so now, neck setters, we do them almost every week. We've learned how to take the neck off of the guitar without damaging the guitar. And changing the geometry of a guitar over time, the neck pulls up, the top pulls up, the action gets high. What are you going to do? You're going to shave the fingerboard down to nothing. You're going to shave the bridge down to nothing, which Martin said it was okay to do back at a certain period of time until these guitars got more valuable, and then people started thinking, no, we don't want to do it that way. So this guitar, original tuners, replaced bridge, go right through them all. This guitar I just finished 2 days ago. The neck was off. If you look closely, there's two very tight top cracks that I swole up and glued. I made a bridge. I had the original bridge. It had been shaved like I was talking about, but the pattern was perfect. And so I used the pattern of that bridge to make an exact replacement bridge down to, you know, a couple thousandths of an inch. Nowadays, you know, 40 years ago we used a ruler, now we use a micrometer. You know, repair people have advanced with how they do things. So I made a new bridge, new saddle. Luckily, the bridge plate on the inside, which you saw earlier, was intact. The neck, I took the neck off, reset the neck. There was, on this guitar, back, I honestly think that when in the Martin shop back in the 30s, they probably didn't, those guys were smart. They understood humidity, they understood dryness, they understood wetness and everything, but they were making guitars all year. I think there were periods of time where they were building guitars in drier or wetter climates. This guitar, the top was sunk here, wasn't from compression or wear, it was probably put together too wet, and so as it dried out, as this dried out, it just pushed the brace down. So it's not an easy repair. It's not a repair that I like to do very often because it's super time consuming and scary. But I think I put a new brace in here. In fact, when I read, this guitar's been sitting around for 2 or 3 years, I thought I had to look inside to see if I'd done it because I was very careful to make a new brace that looked exactly like the old brace. But that added some crown to this part of the body, and when you put the fingerboard on, instead of it dropping off like that, it looks much straighter and cosmetically. It doesn't make any difference acoustically. I don't know. You know, I didn't get to play the guitar the way it was, and it sat around for several years before I finally go, I'm going to finish that guitar. So, you know, I just finished it a few days ago, and it's great. I mean, it's a wonderful guitar. It plays great, but it took a lot of time, took a lot of thought. So, changed parts on this guitar. The bridge. It's got the original tuners. People are all they get all upset about original and replacement tuners. These toners are beautiful, but they don't work worth a darn. I'm not crazy about them. I will probably leave these tuners on there when the guitar is sold, or tell the buyer I'm going to put Waverly tuners on there. Waverly tuners, you can take 2 screws, take these off, put the Waverly tuners on, put the screws back in. No modification to the guitar, and the tuners work beautifully. The guitar gets in tune better, and it's really great that there's kind of like the builders were talking about. There are companies who are making parts. I mean, in the 60s and 70s, replacement tuners for guitars were horrible. You know, you had to drill out holes, you had to remount bigger holes, you had screw holes in the wrong place, you had to put Grover tuners on an old guitar, and you had to remount the top and put these bolts on. You know, you're butchering the guitar to try to make it tune better, and plus they were heavy, so all of a sudden the guitar was top heavy. Nowadays there's some really great, Stuart McDonald makes all kinds of tools and parts that are available for people like me to help keep the originality of the guitar and make the guitar play better. And so this one, that's all that's been done. This one, pretty much the same thing. I built that bridge many years ago. This is kind of my homeboy guitar. This is one I leave around. I like it a lot. I had the original bridge on it, but it was cracked between the pins, and the crack went clear out into here. I saw no reason, and it was coming up. So why would I re-glue the bridge on there? So I made an exact size bridge, and that's 16, 17 years ago, and I refretted the guitar, and since it's when I play, I put the new Waverly tuners on it, so it's easy to keep in tune, and it's something that I like. This is so when I was talking to Bill Collings about making more traditional, he always made a great guitar, but I said, you need to make guitars that are really closer to the traditional sound. And like he said many times, he said, well, send me one. So this is the guitar that I sent him. I sent him this guitar along with a D2h, a 1936 D2h, and a 1935 00045. Just fabulous guitars, you know, to look at and to study. And so I'm going to send him the best thing that I can, because I know he has the ability to look at this and go, I get it. I understand what we're looking at. And so between his vision and his communication with the people that work for him, Bruce Van Wert, if you ever come to the Collings workshops that we've done, Bruce Van Wert is the box builder at Collings. He's the one that actually I don't know who ever came to the Collings workshop, but Bruce said, I pick out the wood. My job is every day I pick out the wood, the tops, the sides, and the back for the guitars that we're starting that day. And so somebody from the audience says, are you saying that you picked out the wood for my guitar? He goes, well, yeah. Then somebody else said, well, I bought my guitar 10 years ago. Did you pick out the wood for that? And he goes, yeah, I'm telling you, that's what I do. And so there's a consistency there, and Bill's ability to communicate with people, craftsmen like that, about what things should be, is pretty phenomenal in creating consistency. And also when there's two or three of us really pushed on making this last series of guitars. They all look the same. A D1 Collings, which is a mahogany D8 style Collings that was made 15 years ago, one that's made today. They look the same. They pretty much look the same. I mean, these guitars kind of look the same. That isn't the point. The point is, like, what is the difference? What is it that makes the guitar special? What is the guitar makes the guitar desirable to a player? What is it makes something that the player, man or woman, wants to keep the rest of their life, you know, and grow with it? That's the thing that they have. That's the direction that they were pushing. You know, they never really pushed to, like, how many models can we make and how fast can we sell them? They're the worst at that. You know, they want to. You know, it took a long time to get him to change to making more traditional guitars. But you take this guitar, it's clear, it's open. There's not much I don't like about that. I mean, and after we're done, we've got a few spaces set up. Doesn't do any good to play these guitars and listen to these guitars with a whole bunch of background noise. So we've got 2 or 3 spaces. If people want to play new guitars, old guitars, sure, welcome to. So then.
Jim, can I jump in real quick? There are a couple questions online. One was asking, 2016 D18, how does Martin manage to continue to capture that traditional familiar Martin sound when nobody else can, or can they?
The question is, how did Martin capture that sound when nobody else can? In a way, I would say that they've had 150 years of opportunity to think about it, and I think as they get motivated by seeing that people, just like Collings got motivated by seeing that people wanted a traditional sounding guitar, they said they took their resources and said, what is it that people are making that we're not? You know, when Martin started making just the 2016, not even the like this model here. It's just what they call the plain D18. That's one of my favorite guitars. That's Martin paying attention and taking an opportunity to make a guitar that really reflects what they've done in the past. That guitar versus a 1980 D18, there's no comparison. They look at this guitar, it's got a wider neck, it's got an ebony bridge, it's got scallop bracing, it's got advanced X bracing, the X has moved closer to the sound hole. It's not even one of their authentics. It's just it's a very nice guitar because they went, oh, you know, they're in the business, like I said earlier, they're in the business to sell guitars. They sell guitars by meeting the market demand. You can't shove guitars down people's throats. You have to make something that people play. When somebody calls me and said, you know, I love Collings, but I've just always wanted a Martin. Which one do you use? What would you suggest? That D18. I said, and for the price. But if you want to buy the authentic, I think the authentic's a great guitar too. So yes, they did it because why wouldn't they be able to do it? They got warehouses full of wood. They have great craftsmen. They have machinery out the wazoo. I mean, they if anybody could do it, they should be able to do it. And they also looked at what other people were doing. They looked at what Bourgeois, Husson Dalton, Collings, and everybody else were doing and going, those look like our guitars. How come they're buying those and not ours? So, yes?
Jim, you talked about third-party tuners that you had on that last one. So when Martin put these together way back when, were those third-party or are those Martin tuners?
Oh, Martin never made tuners. No, they actually, the name on these modern tuners are Waverly, and back then they were Grover. Not the Grover that we think of from the enclosed heavy things from the 60s or 70s. Yeah, I mean, Martin didn't make cases. They didn't make bridge pins. I don't think they didn't make fret wire. You know, they bought parts. You know, as anybody would. It makes sense. Yes.
Didn't Martin on their D2hs go from Brazilian rosewood to Indian rosewood in 1970? 69s were Brazilian and 70s were Indian, is that right?
Mike asked the question about the switch from Martin from Brazilian rosewood to Indian rosewood, and I think actually in '69 both existed. I think occasionally in '69, when they made the switch, it wasn't like just cut and dry. I believe it was '69 that I see early on, or not even necessarily early on, but both Brazilian guitars and Indian rosewood guitars. I'm sure there's an aficionado out there that can correct me, and I'm not really sure that it matters because in my mind, though that is not an era of guitar that I would consider nowadays to be extremely desirable guitars. You know, it doesn't really match up to what Martin is doing now, like the gentleman just asked about the new D18s. And they were, you know, '69 is awfully close to the '70s, and that was an era of like, why are they doing this? But I gotta say, there were guitars out of the '70s that were nice guitars. It isn't like they took this big nosedive. It isn't like a General Motors pickup truck from the '70s that had rust on it the day you drove it off the lot. You know.
So you didn't see a lot of difference. I mean,
tonally.
Yeah.
No, I don't necessarily. I think desirability and price on the used market, the Brazilian guitars always have brought more. But even that has kind of slowed down in the present when you see that you can that Martin, as well as these modern the modern traditional type makers that I'm talking about, are making such good guitars. I mean, they don't compare to what Martin's making now. They don't compare to what Collings is making now. And so just because it's Brazilian, if it's Brazilian but they were using, you know, I'm sure we're going to get a question about glue. They were using kind of rubbery tight bond glues. They weren't, the bracing wasn't scalloped. The X braces were in the different position. There were a lot. They put a heavy rosewood bridge plate instead of a small maple bridge plate. There were lots of differences that were more important than the whether it was Indian rosewood or Brazilian rosewood. So where am I at now? Yes.
Well, the scalp question, I mean, D35s, they were the flat ones, and most of the other models are scalp, or what?
Oh, Martin didn't, after 1944, I think that was the last year of scallop bracing until 1976, when they came out with the HD28. You asked about it. The question was a D35 scallop. D35 was a model. Martin was doing non-scallop braces all up through ever since 1945. All they had what they called, there's always these roads that go down. Late 40s, some of the guitars had what they called tapered braces. But skip past that to the more modern era guitars of a D35, which started in 1967. They weren't scallop, but they were smaller braces. And a lot of people, D35 has a 3-piece back, kind of a fancy guitar, and kind of bassy and kind of tubby sounding. A lot of people thought, oh, that's because of the 3-piece back. And it's not. It's more that the braces were about a 1/16 of an inch smaller than a D28, and so the top was more flexible, and those guitars have kind of waned in popularity over years. I think a D28, no matter what era, I mean, it has always been more popular than a D35. But it was in '76 when Martin goes, oh, people like scallop bracing, we can do that. So they started making scallop brace guitars, but I don't think they really took into account all of the other aspects of making a guitar with a little more flexible top. And those guitars have kind of fallen out of favor. You don't see them very much anymore. And still in that time, I think the glues that they were using were more rubbery, weren't as permanent. And those guitars were, as a repair person, were kind of prone to failure. We don't see that now because everybody's kind of going, oh, whether you're using, one of the buzzwords now is hide glue. You hear that all the time. Oh yeah, it's all hide glue. Hide glue is nothing but a animal hide glue that violin makers have been using for hundreds of years. As it dries hard and is fairly brittle, has good adhesion. True hide glue, you cook up hot and you put it on. You have to get it together pretty darn quick. It's not real convenient to use. Martin used it clear up into the 50s. I don't know the cutoff date. Some of those things have never been that important to me. But I think they used it on braces even when they were using other glues for gluing the bodies together or whatever. But it is a great way to put an instrument together. Violin maker, like I say, violin makers have done it for ever and ever and ever. Of course, a violin is made in such a way that if something's wrong with it, you take it apart. The top overhangs the sides, get a spatula, take it apart, open it up, fix everything, put the top back on. You can't really do that with a guitar. Guitars are not made, necks can come off, like I said, but guitar bodies, you don't want to take a top off. You don't want to take a back off. That's just not, doesn't make any sense at all. Modern makers, the kind of glues, the Elmer's type glue, the Type Bond type glues that have been developed since the 50s have gotten incredibly better. They've gotten, the chemistry of them can come really close to, and even the adhesive strength can be as much as hide glue. The rigidity can be as much as hide glue. Work time is much better. But if the market says, well, I want to, my pre-war Martin was all made with hide glue, that's what I want. So most modern makers are using, I forget how exactly what they call it. They call it animal protein glue, which is, whether it's made from fish or goats or skin or whatever, there are glues now, we use it in the shop every day. It's called fish glue. It looks like hide glue. You don't have to heat it. You put it on, glue stuff up. It stays. I like working with it. If you put something together with it, if you put something together with even the modern Tite Bonds glue, one of the drawbacks to that kind of glue is it's not very water soluble. If you use Tite Bond 3, you're toast. Water doesn't touch it. So if you have to take something back apart, you're in trouble. With hide glue, with fish glue, a little moisture, a little heat, patience. I spent almost 4 hours taking a piece out of a 34 Sunburst D18 yesterday that somebody put in with some Tite Bond glue, but the piece was very important to, there was a chip out of the sound hole. It was floating kind of loose, and it took me 4 hours to get it out patiently, trying to soak up the Tite Bond glue. If it had been with hide, I could have put some warm water on there with a paper towel, gone to lunch, come back, it would have fallen apart. But it wasn't. So builders are all, most builders are using modern glues. I think Santa Cruz still uses a modern aliphatic resin Tite Bond type glue. Nothing wrong with that. They know, they have a system for what they're doing. They understand why they're using it. They're not having glue failure. And their guitars are finding a place in the marketplace and getting sold. Rejecting an instrument because of something like that, I think, is kind of ridiculous. Just like some people, will reject a guitar because, it doesn't have a true dovetail neck. It's a bolt-on neck. How does the guitar sound? Oh, it's the best sounding guitar I've ever heard, but the neck's bolted on. There are many, many other things that affect the way a guitar sounds and lasts, other than a few what glue is used, and how the frets, whether the frets are hammered in or pressed in, or whether the neck is bolted on or dovetailed on. So you have to look at the structural integrity of stuff, and also know that whether it's Collings or whether it's any of these other people, that they know how to, they choose a path. They look at the past, they choose a path, and then they make it work for them. If they had a percentage of failure put into their build scheme, it wouldn't work. They'd have been gone a long time ago. But they don't. They really try their best. And that even goes for the big manufacturers that we were talking about before we started this. Somebody like Taylor. Taylor is amazing in how they've looked at their marketplace and put together what they want to do as far as finishes, as far as joinery, as far as using CNC machines to make everything fit together perfectly. They have a system, I think Chris Martin said one time, we show up to work every day trying to make the best product we possibly can. And I think that's really true of pretty much all makers, no matter what style of instrument they're building right now, whether they're building the modern instruments that we're really not talking about tonight extensively, or the people that are looking to the past to see what's been made. They're building the very best thing that they can, and we all benefit from it. If I can't even imagine what it would have been like if when these guitars in the 60s they're now incredibly expensive guitars, if somebody would have shown up with something like this Collings Traditional, would have changed at tenth of the price, $300 instead of $3,000, back in the 60s. But it didn't exist, but now it does. And for years I've always said, I love pre-war. My two favorite guitars are pre-war Mortons and modern Collings. And that's just the way it is. I can't do everything, I look at guitars for how they feel, the weight and balance of the guitars for the what limited amount of time that I allow to play. Kind of lazy when it comes to that. I work on guitars way more than I do play them, but that's always been me. I've been fixing guitars since I was 18 years old, and I'm still fixing them. So I like, when I look at a guitar, I can see how it's built and the integrity of the instrument, the integrity of the materials, and the integrity of the design, especially when it's traditional, because then I don't have to think too far. You know, I go, yep, looks like a great mahogany guitar. I brought a few guitars just for fun that are rare, that are fun, just to show. That's a Gibson made a lot of sunburst guitars. I mean, to see a natural finish Gibson guitar is pretty rare. You know, J45s, hundreds of them, all sunburst. But Martin, it's not. You know, sunburst in a Martin is a pretty rare guitar. And in 1935, they only made 6 D28s in sunburst finish. And I don't know whether this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, but this is one of the 6. And it's just, it's something that I look at, it's something that I play, it's something that I let other people look at and play, because it teaches you a lot about, you know, what somebody was doing at that time to make the very best guitar that they made. You know, they didn't make a D45. I guess they did. No, the D45's 37. I can't. 1935. I think this might have been about it. You know.
Where do you find a guitar like that?
Oh, it was upstairs.
It just stopped right here.
The question of is, where did I find a guitar like this? And I think that's a real legitimate question. I've been doing this since I was 18. I've worked on lots and lots of guitars. I've bought and sold and repaired and traded guitars since I was 18. Stuff just kind of over a period of time. It is, you know, if you look at the number of guitars that are considered fine and rare guitars that I have, it's not that many, you know, because I don't really go searching anymore. That is, pardon?
They come to you?
A lot of times they come to me, or I hear about them, and occasionally I run upon, you know, I bought a guitar. I haven't bought a guitar for a long time, and then I bought a 36 herringbone this weekend out in Phoenix. I'd seen the guitar years and years ago, and the guy called and said, oh, I'm finally going to sell the guitar, and I liked the guitar, and I figured out a way to pay for it. And so, you know, so that's how it is, you know. He'd had the guitar since 1962, and every time I saw him, you know, I would talk to him about it. I appraised the guitar for him over the years. I made sure he knew what it was worth, so he'd have it insured properly. And last week he called and said, well, I'm going to sell it. I said, okay. Big gulp. But I can buy a guitar like this. I look at it and I know what I'm looking at, and yet I wouldn't spend 1/10 the price of this guitar on a car. I just don't care about it, you know. It's just something. Car takes me from here to home and to the grocery store, you know. I don't really care, you know. Something like this, every time you play it, and the longer you play it, the better it gets. So this walked into my life a while back, and so I go, oh, it's good to be patient for almost 50 years, you know. Yes.
Kind of along those lines, I know you do a lot of repair for people all over the world, probably. Anyway, have you ever received in something to have minor repairs and not thought it wasn't blown away by what the guitar was, but when you played it, it surprised you.
Oh, sure. I'll ask if when people send us or me guitars to repair, where you kind of think this is going to be a totally average guitar, but then it turns out that it's something special. Sure, that happens. You know, it actually happened to me when I laid these three guitars out here in the world of guitar value based on how they were built. This 41 should be the least valuable guitar of the three. Yet I'm going, wow, this thing is great. You know, it is. So yeah, you're surprised. I mean, that's the fun of it. You know, that's the fun of doing it is to be surprised and also when you get a good guitar from somebody that's, you know, like a three-legged dog, and you're able to put it in the shop and, you know, reset the neck and refret it and maybe glue some loose braces and then have it just come to life. I mean, that's still enjoyable. It's real enjoyable. And I think not only myself, but the guys in the shop, you know, when they do that on a guitar, they go, I'm so surprised. And Mike did a 45 D18 for a guy a couple weeks ago. And he had kind of low expectations of it. It had some finish work on it, and it had other issues, and had been poorly repaired by somebody else. And so, but he got it done. He said, I can't believe it. This thing is great. So that's always fun. And yes, you do see changes. So, any other questions online or anybody else?
We can get to it at the end because they're kind of broad.
Okay. One last thing I'm going to talk about that was asked earlier, but not since we started, was modern makers using what they call torrefied wood on tops to make a guitar sound more like an old guitar. If you don't, torrefied wood is basically, usually, you can torrefy anything, but the process of making a top torrefied is they put the wood in a hot environment that would actually catch the wood on fire, except that it's oxygen deprived, and bring it up to a temperature, and it seals the resins in the wood, and so it can't catch fire because there's no oxygen. And then they bring it back down, and the whole idea is that top then mimics more what an old guitar would sound like. People ask me, you know, we sell, Bourgeois primarily uses, most of their guitars I think are torrefied. Collings uses some torrefied. I honestly don't have an opinion, you know. It's so new that I haven't played enough. I play them and they go, these are great guitars, but you know, it's a torrefied Adirondack top, you know, put the bow tie on it, you know, and then here's a plain old Sitka top guitar, and you go, I like that one better. So it's personal, but it's not going to change the world. And then I think the last thing I'm going to say is there something that either the modern makers are going to do, that Martin's going to do, that Collings is going to do? It's going to change everything. That we had a discussion earlier about something that could actually change the world. You know, they've been doing X-brace guitars with tops about this thick and neck angles about like this for, you know, 100 years or more. Well, the chances of somebody's new design, and all these modern builders that are making all these crazy bracing patterns and angles and all this neck angles and bridge tensions and, you know, all the floating braces on the inside. Will somebody one day come up with something that you go, you're right, all this stuff is junk, we're done, you know? I don't know. It happened in the archery business. I was telling somebody earlier, you know, as a kid, you know, you had a stick with a string on it and you shot it, and then they came out with a recurve bow. That kind of eliminated the straight stick. And then in the 60s, somebody started putting pulleys on the end of a bow. That kind of changed it until Allen Patton the Allen company put a pulley on the end that was a cam, and so it pulled past the point of pressure and then became relaxed. Go to a sporting goods store and try to buy a bow now. It changed the world. This is something that's thousands of years, you know, thousands of years. You're dead, you know. It changed. I'm happy if it happens, but I'm also very content in in the world that I've been able to spend most of my life doing, is messing with cool stuff. So, how are we on time?
We're at an hour.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna quit the video recording. So if anybody has any questions before that, we quit that. I'll do it. But if afterwards, we can. Yes.
Feel like playing a little more music on the 35?
I only know 3 chords. It's been 50 years. Makes you happy. Actually, for contrast, I mean, this is a mahogany guitar, but this really represents the efforts of someone who worked his whole guitar making career to make the very best. Thank you, Bill Collins. You know, thank you, Martin. You know, for getting the ball rolling on this, for being consistent. You know, a little wavy here and there, but you know, being around for everybody to go. I want something that sounds like that. You know, so thanks for coming.
I got a few questions for online real quick.
Sure.
How do you feel about stainless steel frets?
As a wimpy player, I don't really need them because I don't wear out frets very much. I got a really light touch. I think if you're an aggressive player and if you play a lot, they definitely extend the life of the fret considerably. They're difficult to put in. They're difficult to dress. Even we have, as we're moving into technology, we have a Plek machine now that files frets, and you have when you put in the computer program in the Plek machine for filing stainless steel frets, it moves at a much slower pace because they're much harder to file. Tonally, I don't honestly have an opinion. You know, I think Mike might have an opinion. Mike's put more of those in there than anybody else, but personally, I don't. So.
Couple more for you.
Yes.
Does a builder like George Loudon start with a different target sound and build towards it, or innovative construction idea that results in a sound that becomes the target? Kind of your thoughts on that?
Whoa. Well, George Loudon is a very talented builder. I mean, he's an amazing craftsman. I think probably fairly early on, you know, he came up with his modern guitar design. I don't know him well enough to know. Say, hey George, did you base any of your design on pre-done, you know, things from the past? If it's X-Brace, then I'd say yes, he did base it on things in the past. But he's a smart builder. He's a good builder, and he's building a guitar that he likes, and that's the important thing. He builds guitars that he really likes.
Along that same lines, somebody was asking about, you know, the new Taylor V-Class stuff and the Grand Pacific ones, like the slope shoulder dreads. How you feel like those stack up? Not comparing them, but you know, that sound versus a Martin, or we talked about before we went live, kind of Martin versus Taylor.
Right. I think Andy Powers is one of the really good things that has happened to Taylor. He's really like Bob pretty much cut him loose and said, "Go with it." And so Andy is now kind of the lead person as far as design, and he said, "Oh, the X brace has been going on since who knows when, turn of the century, of the last one." He said, "I want to brace a guitar." He wants to change it. Maybe his guitar will be the one that makes the X brace guitar obsolete. I don't know yet. I think the guitars sound different than traditional Taylors. I think they sound a little more open, a little warmer, similar to a Martin type sound. But again, I think they sound like their own guitar, you know, and I wish them well. I think they do a really, really amazing job. And I doubt that this is Andy's last pitch into the arena. He's a smart guy and he has a lot of resources, and I'm sure they'll continue to refine those designs and also find out if that's a marketplace for them. If people say, if I want to buy a Dreadnought, I'm going to go buy a Martin or I'm going to buy a Collings. Or, you know, I love my Taylors, you know. I don't care about it sounding like a pre-war Martin or anything like that. So, but I think it's a great direction to go, and I think it's being done by a really talented, honest guy.
One more. Someone's asking, how will a Collings D1A age, like a standard, you know, not a traditional, but a standard build Collings? The comment is, the trebles on it cut like a knife. What do you think that's going to do over time?
I think it's. I said don't buy a guitar with the idea that you're going to have to play it for a long time before you like it. If you like it, it'll be there. If you like the cut of the treble, which an older D1A, that was my first project with Bill, was the D1A many years ago. Is I sent him some pre-war guitars, and you know, to kind of come up with a modern Dreadnought sound. He built it. They're stiffer than this guitar. This guitar has more bass and more warmth because it's built in their traditional series. But the standard D1As, the ones, I guess the testament in that is the ones that we get in as used guitars, the more beat up they are, the faster they sell, because somebody has loved them, they played them, and they've been, so they'll do really well. You will never lose, if you like that treble, you'll never lose it. It's going to be there, you know. It's so, and I even told Bill when we developed this traditional series, I said, you're losing the people that have bought the D1As and the D2Hs and everything that are 10, 15 years old. They know how consistent your guitars are. You're losing market shares to yourself. If you want to build a guitar, if you want to sell a guitar to a person who wants a more vintage sound, a more old-fashioned sound, you need to make a few changes. It doesn't make what you're doing obsolete in any way, shape, or form. And so that's what they did. I just sold this 1992 Brazilian D2H the other day that I'd had since '92. I love that guitar. It was a great guitar. You know, it doesn't sound. It sounds different than the traditionals. I didn't sell it for any particular reason except that a friend of mine really liked it. That's really how this whole thing started. Is that I have a guitar that I liked, and some of them, you know, I'd never sell that guitar. You know, I've got 2 or 3 Collings upstairs that I would never sell because there's more to them than just the fact of what they are. I've had better sounding D18s, you know, but there's something that attaches me to that. But a lot of times people say, you've had that guitar a long time and I love it. I say, well, I'd sell it. You know, it finds a new home. It's good for a guitar to find somebody that's going to actually play it. Was that it for questions? Yeah. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. If there's anything, yes, John.
I heard, and you've reinforced that with some of your comments, that guitars that are well used often come in well loved, played a lot, more resonation, they're just more alive. Back in the day, I knew a couple guitarists who claimed that it really helped age sound hole by a speaker. And
I've had mine sitting in front of a stereo for 30 years.
Yeah.
didn't make a difference.
It's a warm, smooth sound
I-
guitar.
When I was
I
building
don't know
guitar,
the science, that's why.
when I built guitars, I would put an eye hook before I put the neck on. I had to drill a hole and I'd put an eye hook in it and I would hang it up in front of the speakers and I'd turn on the Allman Brothers full blast, you know. Yeah. And so what would it hurt? A guitar is meant to vibrate. If you take any one of these guitars, no matter how old it is, and if you play it for an hour, it sounds better. If you play this guitar for an hour, it's going to warm up. Violinists have known this forever, you know. If you're a violinist, have a violin shop and you've got a very high-end violin, if you know some orchestra player is going to come to play it, you set it up, you play it, you get it in tune, and you have all your people in the shop just play that thing and play it to warm it up. And a lot of times the guy that comes in to look at it says, "Oh, you guys warm this thing up. I'm going to come in tomorrow, but don't touch it. I want to hear it when it's cold." You know, sure, it changes it. You know, sometimes these guitars that I've had for years, they're almost like they pout. You know, you pull it out of the case and it's going, "Yeah, so what? You want me to sound good? Tough luck. You haven't looked at me for months." You know, and so you kind of have to start over, but you have to own a guitar long enough and play it long enough to have confidence that it is a great guitar. You know, that it's going to serve your purpose in your definition of greatness. So, yes, it changes things. So if anybody has anything they really want to play, like I say, they sound better in a quieter environment. We've got a couple of rooms set up. You're welcome to play on new stuff, old stuff, you know. So thanks for coming. I'll keep talking as long as somebody will listen. So.